Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told this podcast. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today we're going deep into a story that sounds like, well, something straight out of a William Gibson novel. A hidden online marketplace called the Silk Road.
The Silk Road. It really did live up to that name, too.
What do you mean?
Well, the name wasn't just random. It was a deliberate echo of the historical Silk Road.
You mean those ancient trade routes?
Yeah.
The ones that spanned continents and brought silk and spices from the east to the west.
Exactly. And just like its namesake, this digital Silk Road aimed to connect buyers and sellers across vast distances.
Well, I mean, this time they were dealing in things a bit more controversial.
That's putting it mildly. Primarily illegal drugs, but also a whole range of other goods and services.
Some legal, some not.
Right?
So how did they manage to keep this massive online marketplace hidden? I mean, the internet is supposed to be, well, public.
That's where things get really interesting. The Silk Road operated on a part of the internet you don't stumble upon by accident. The dark web.
Okay, getting a little spooky now.
Specifically, a network called Tor. Think of it as a hidden city within the internet, a place where anonymity is the currency transactions happen under the radar.
So it wasn't like you could just Google Silk Road and find this marketplace.
Not at all. To even access the Silk Road, you needed special software knowledge of how to navigate the Tor network and, well, the right kind of curiosity.
It's like a digital speakeasy during Prohibition.
Hidden in plain sight, but only accessible to those who knew the password.
So once you managed to get past all those digital roadblocks, what was it like on the inside? Was it just a chaotic free-for-all?
Surprisingly, no. The Silk Road was surprisingly organized, almost like a digital version of a traditional marketplace.
With rules and regulations.
With its own set of rules and even a reputation system. Buyers could rate sellers, leave reviews, and build trust just like you would on Amazon or eBay.
Can you imagine leaving a review for your pharmaceutical supplier?
It's a bit bizarre, isn't it?
Strangely efficient, too, though. It sounds like they were trying to build a community, almost.
You're right. The Silk Road wasn't just a faceless marketplace. It was a community, albeit one built around illicit activities.
The community of outlaws.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Silk Road even had its own book club.
Wait, a book club on the Silk Road.
It sounds unbelievable, right? But it's true. They had discussions on all sorts of books.
What kind of books?
Well, everything from the anarchist cookbook, which, given the context, isn't that surprising, to mainstream novels like Catch-22.
Okay, so a pretty diverse reading list.
Most of the books were pirated digital copies, of course, but the fact that they had a book club at all speaks to this strange mix of rebellion and intellectualism, that kind of defined the Silk Road community.
Okay, so we've got this hidden online marketplace dealing in illegal goods with its own book club and a reputation system like Amazon. What's the missing piece? How are they handling the money?
That's where Bitcoin comes in.
Of course, Bitcoin.
This was back in the early 2010s when Bitcoin was still relatively new.
Not widely understood.
Right. But the creators of Silk Road recognized its potential. Bitcoin's decentralized and pseudonymous nature made it the perfect currency for a marketplace built on anonymity.
Okay, that makes sense. So Bitcoin allowed buyers and sellers on Silk Road to transact without revealing their identities to each other or to the authorities. It was like a digital version of cash, only even more untraceable.
Exactly. And the Silk Road actually played a significant role in bringing Bitcoin into the mainstream.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Before Silk Road, Bitcoin was mostly the domain of tech enthusiasts and cypherpunks.
The early adopters.
But the media attention surrounding the Silk Road exposed a much wider audience to the concept of cryptocurrency, showing its potential for both good and bad.
So Silk Road wasn't just a marketplace. It was a social experiment, a technological innovator, and a challenge to traditional notions of law and order. It's a lot to process, honestly.
It is, and keep in mind, this was just the beginning. The story of the Silk Road and its founder is about to take a turn that's even more dramatic.
And unexpected. Before we get into that, I want to remind you, if you're enjoying this deep dive, hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss any other fascinating stories on Tell Me More. Now back to the Silk Road. We've talked about the marketplace, the technology, the community, but what about the person behind it all?
Yes, the mastermind. The Silk Road wasn't just a product of technology, it was the brainchild of a very specific individual operating under the pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts.
Dread Pirate Roberts. Okay, that's a name that definitely conjures up images of a shadowy figure lurking in the digital shadows.
And the mystery surrounding his identity only added to the intrigue. For a long time, no one knew who Dread Pirate Roberts really was. Was it a lone wolf? a collective, or something else entirely.
The story is starting to sound like a digital whodunit.
Exactly, and like any good mystery, this one had a twist. You see, the Dread Pirate Roberts wasn't some shadowy supervillain or a collective of hackers. He was a seemingly ordinary young man named Ross Ulbricht.
Wait, what? From mysterious mastermind to ordinary guy? How did that happen?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's where I'll pick up next time, as we delve into the fascinating and ultimately tragic story of Ross Ulbricht, the man behind the mask of Dread Pirate Roberts.
Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast. Still with me on this deep dive into the Silk Road.
Still here.
Good, because we left off talking about the mysterious Dread Pirate Roberts.
The mastermind behind the Silk Road.
And how his true identity turned out to be, well, a seemingly ordinary young man named Ross Ulbricht.
Yeah, it's a real head-scratcher. You have this incredibly complex and sophisticated online marketplace,
Dealing in all sorts of illicit goods and services.
and the person running the whole show is this seemingly unassuming guy. It's almost like finding out the Wizard of Oz is just a guy behind a curtain,
Yeah.
with some smoke and mirrors.
So how did he pull it off? Was Ulbricht some kind of tech genius? A master hacker?
Well, he was definitely tech-savvy, but his skills weren't necessarily superhuman. He was more of an entrepreneur, a visionary who saw the potential of the dark web and Bitcoin.
To create something truly unique.
Exactly, and he was meticulous in covering his tracks, using encryption VPNs, all sorts of tools to maintain his anonymity. But even the most careful criminals make mistakes.
Ah, so that's where the investigators finally caught up with him. They found a chink in his digital armor.
It wasn't some elaborate sting operation or high-tech hacking that brought Ulbricht down. It was actually a series of seemingly small slip-ups.
Little breadcrumbs he left along the way.
Exactly. For example, he used his real email address on a forum post about the Silk Road early on, and that eventually led investigators to his real identity.
Wow, so a simple mistake like that brought the whole Silk Road empire crashing down. It's a reminder that even in the digital world, the smallest details can have huge consequences.
Absolutely. And it also speaks to the dedication and persistence of the investigators, the ones who were determined to bring down the Silk Road. They spent years piecing together the puzzle, following every lead, and ultimately they caught their man.
So what happened to Ulbricht after he was arrested? What were the charges?
Oh, they were pretty serious. He was facing a whole slew of charges, including engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise narcotics, trafficking, money laundering, computer hacking.
Wow.
And then there were the allegations of murder-for-hire plots, which, although he was never formally charged with those, certainly added to the drama and painted him in an even more negative light.
Murder-for-hire plots.
Yeah.
That takes this whole thing to a whole other level.
It does, doesn't it? But even with those serious accusations swirling around him, Ulbricht maintained his innocence throughout the trial.
He did.
Oh, yeah. His defense team argued that he was just a naive idealist, that he created a platform for free trade, not a criminal mastermind.
So it was a classic case of the defense claiming their client was just a pawn in a larger game, caught up in something he didn't fully understand.
Exactly. But the prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued that Ulbricht was fully aware of the illegal activities taking place on Silk Road and that he profited handsomely from them.
And they had evidence to back that up.
Mountains of it. They presented chat logs, financial records, and even testimony from former Silk Road users.
To support their case.
Right.
So who did the jury believe? What was the final verdict?
Well, after a lengthy trial, the jury found Ulbricht guilty on all 7 counts. And the judge, clearly seeing him as a serious threat to society, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Life in prison. That's a harsh sentence. It sounds like the judge wanted to make an example of him, send a message that the dark web wasn't a lawless playground.
That's exactly right. Ulbricht's conviction was a landmark case. It demonstrated that even the seemingly anonymous world of the dark web wasn't beyond the reach of the law. It was a major victory for law enforcement and a clear warning to anyone else thinking of setting up shop on the dark side of the internet.
But as we know, the story doesn't end there. The demand for illegal goods and services didn't just disappear overnight. In fact, almost as soon as Silk Road was shut down, a new marketplace popped up to take its place. Silk Road 2.0.
Yep, it's like a digital version of that old saying. When one door closes, another one opens. And in this case, the new door was even more fortified, with improved security features and a new administrator operating under the pseudonym Defcon.
So they basically picked up where Ulbricht left off, hoping to avoid the mistakes he made and keep the Silk Road legacy alive.
Precisely. And for a while, it seemed like they might succeed. Silk Road 2.0 attracted a new wave of users and vendors, proving that the demand for darknet markets was as strong as ever. But the authorities were watching closely, learning from their previous mistakes and developing new strategies to combat this evolving threat.
So it became a cat and mouse game between law enforcement and the dark web, with both sides constantly trying to outsmart each other.
Exactly. And this battle continues to this day. While Silk Road 2.0 was eventually shut down, just like its predecessor, new darknet markets have emerged to take its place. It's an ongoing challenge for law enforcement agencies around the world trying to keep up with the ever-changing landscape of the dark web.
It sounds like a never-ending cycle. But amidst all this talk about illegal marketplaces and digital cat and mouse games, what happened to Ross Ulbricht? Did he just fade into obscurity, spending the rest of his days behind bars?
Well, for over a decade, that seemed to be his fate. But then, in a surprising turn of events, Ulbricht received a full pardon from President Donald Trump in 2025.
Pardon after all that. What a twist.
It was a controversial decision, to say the least. Some people praised it as an act of mercy, arguing that Ulbricht's sentence was too harsh for a nonviolent crime. Others condemned it, claiming it sent the wrong message about the seriousness of online crime and the dangers of the dark web.
So even after all these years, the Silk Road story continues to generate debates and spark strong opinions. It's a testament to the lasting impact of this saga, how it forced us to confront complex questions about technology freedom and the limits of the law.
You're absolutely right. The Silk Road wasn't just a marketplace. It was a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of the dark side of the internet, and a reminder that even in the digital age, actions have consequences. And now, with Ulbricht out of prison, we're left to wonder what the next chapter of this story will hold.
It's a fascinating and thought-provoking story, isn't it? And while we've covered a lot of ground today, there's still so much more to explore before we delve deeper into the aftermath of the Silk Road and its enduring legacy. Let's take a quick break. If you're enjoying this deep dive, remember to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any other fascinating stories on Tell Me More. We'll be back in a moment to continue our journey into the world of the Silk Road. Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we?
We have, from hidden marketplaces to Bitcoin to murder-for-hire plots.
And a presidential pardon?
The Silk Road saga has it all.
It really does. But even with the FBI taking down Silk Road not just once but twice, it still feels like we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg,
It's true, the dark web is vast and constantly evolving.
So even with these takedowns, it feels like they were only scratching the surface.
Exactly. It's like trying to patrol a city that constantly shifts its shape, streets, appearing and disappearing overnight.
So what does that mean for the future of these online black markets? Are they just going to keep thriving no matter what law enforcement does?
Well, it's certainly a challenge. The very nature of the dark web, with its anonymity and decentralization, makes it incredibly difficult to police using traditional methods. But that doesn't mean we should just give up. There are things we can do.
Like what? What strategies can we use to combat this?
One approach is to focus on disrupting the infrastructure itself. Targeting the servers that host these marketplaces, developing tools to de-anonymize users, or even cracking down on the cryptocurrency exchanges that facilitate the movement of money.
So making it harder, riskier, and less profitable to operate in this space.
Right. But we also can't forget about the demand side of things.
You mean the people who are actually using these markets?
Exactly. We need to understand why people are turning to these marketplaces in the first place. Is it addiction? Lack of access to healthcare? Or even just a desire for privacy and freedom from what some perceive as overly intrusive government regulations?
So it's a much bigger conversation than just shutting down websites and arresting people.
Absolutely. We need a multi-pronged approach. Law enforcement needs to adapt and develop new techniques. We need technological solutions to make these markets less secure, but we also need to address the social and economic factors that drive people to them in the first place.
It's a complex problem that requires a complex solution.
I agree.
This Silk Road saga really forced us to think differently about the internet, didn't it? It's not just this utopian space of free information and connection anymore. There's a dark underbelly, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Right, and it's a reminder that technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. The Silk Road story is about the unintended consequences of innovation, the challenges of balancing freedom with security, and the constant struggle between those who want to use technology to empower people and those who want to exploit it for their own gain.
So where do we go from here? What are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive into the Silk Road?
I think the biggest lesson is that we need to move beyond simplistic narratives. The dark web isn't just a playground for criminals. There are complex motivations at play, and often there are real people with real problems seeking solutions they can't find elsewhere. We need to understand those motivations if we want to effectively address the challenges posed by these online black markets.
And we need to be having these conversations openly and honestly about the potential risks and benefits of technology,
Yeah.
about how to balance individual freedoms with the need for security and accountability.
I couldn't agree more. The Silk Road may be gone, but its legacy lives on. It's a reminder that the digital world is a reflection of ourselves with all our complexities and contradictions. And as we continue to explore this new frontier, we need to do so with both a sense of wonder and a healthy dose of caution.
So for our listeners out there, maybe this deep dive into the Silk Road has sparked some new thoughts. Maybe you're wondering about the future of the dark web, about the ethical implications of technology, or even just about the choices we make as individuals in this increasingly digital world. Those are all important questions and ones that we'll continue to grapple with as we move forward.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to keep exploring these issues, to share your own thoughts and perspectives, and to help shape a digital future that reflects our values and aspirations.
Thanks for joining us on Tell Me More Stories Told As podcast. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.